timely subject of terrorism. At this time, I'd like to introduce Dr. Beth Liddell. In addition to being a member of our school committee, she's also a historian, and will introduce the program. Thank you.
Welcome, everyone. American novelist Willa Cather wrote shortly after World War I that the world broke into two, expressing the feeling of many in that time that life before was totally different than it was after. Since the events of September 11th, many of us have had that same feeling, that life is different and that we need people who can help us understand how and why. It is my great pleasure today to introduce you to, this morning, to two such people who have written, lectured, and taught extensively as experts in the subjects that over the past few weeks have been on every American's mind: terrorism, how the United States is responding to it, and how it affects our lives. Both live in Winchester and have received more prizes and honors than most of us have ever dreamed of, because they're very good at understanding and explaining the international political landscape that we live in. And today they're here to answer your questions and help us all understand that landscape better. Dr. Louise Richardson, until recently, was an associate professor of government at Harvard University and is now executive dean of the Radcliffe Institute for Advanced Study. She is an expert in international terrorism and international relations theory, author of When Allies Differ, Anglo-American Relations in the Suez and Falkland Crises, and has won Harvard's highest teaching awards for her excellence and sensitivity in teaching these subjects to her students. Dr. Ashton Carter, former Assistant Secretary of Defense for International Security Policy in the Clinton administration, is the Ford Foundation Professor of Science and International Affairs at Harvard's Kennedy School of Government. He is co-author of Preventive Defense, a New Security Strategy for America, and was responsible for national security policy towards the former Soviet Union, including their nuclear weapons and other weapons of mass destruction, and for oversight of the U.S. nuclear arsenal and missile defense programs. So he is one of the guys who keeps us all safe. So this is our format. I will ask Dr. Carter and Dr. Richardson a few questions just to get us warmed up, and then open the floor to questions from you. Get the roving mic and run around like Oprah and let you talk. First, we hope to the students, and then to the faculty and staff who can mix in and out. So to get things started, maybe we could start with you, Dr. Richardson, with really a very basic question of what is terrorism. If you could give us a little of its history so we know how it began and how it's changed maybe over the last 100 years.
Thanks, Ben. Good morning. I'm delighted to be here. Terrorism, the only universally accepted attribute of the term terrorism is that it's pejorative. Terrorism is something the bad guys do. So if you're in any conflict with a group and you successfully pin the label terrorism on them, then you've gone a long way towards winning the public relations battle. But actually, terrorism means something quite specific. The term is often used very loosely, but it means something quite specific. To be a terrorist act, the act must be violent. It must be politically motivated. The point of terrorism is to communicate a message, to communicate a political message. It's also the case that the target of a terrorist act is not the audience. So for a terrorist, when they commit an act, they don't really care whether it's person A or person B that they kill. They're not trying to convince person A or person B of anything. They're trying to convince somebody else, usually the government. And the final attribute of terrorism is that innocent people are deliberately targeted. So the point of terrorism then is to convey a political message by randomly choosing individuals to target. And by randomly choosing people, the idea is that the terrorism is more widespread because people are not specifically targeted. Now, terrorism has been around a very long time. far back as the 1st century after Christ, there was a group called the Sicarii who objected to Roman rule and used to use terrorist tactics by stabbing people publicly. In the Middle Ages, there was another group called the Assassins. The term assassin dates from this time, from the 11th to the 13th century. Again, a mixture of political and religious views. So in fact, terrorism has been around for a very long time. It's been a weapon of the weak against the strong. Thank you. Then there was another, in the 18th century, in the Middle East, several groups used suicide terrorism, suicide bombing, in an effort to combat the much stronger colonial forces. In the late 19th century, you had quite a wave of terrorism amongst the Russian anarchists. But the terrorism that we've seen today largely dates from the late 1960s. It largely grew out of the Middle East, but is in no sense limited to the Middle East. And it has been moving in ways, if you like, since the late 1960s. Sometimes tied into broader political conflicts, sometimes not. So terrorism then is something that's been around a very long time, traditionally used by groups who feel they're both outmanned and outgunned by their opponents, so it's a weapon they can use against a stronger enemy. And the weapon they use is targeting innocent people in order to convey their political message.
Thank you. I'm sure we'll want to follow that up with your questions later. Now I'd like to ask Dr. Carter a question. Though many have compared September 11th to the bombing of Pearl Harbor in 1941, it was really the end of World War II and the beginning of the Cold War that the use and threat of nuclear weapons triggered the same kind of long-term apprehensions that we have now. Yet so far, we have actually dodged the bullet of nuclear war. Can you explain a little bit about how this is maybe a new kind of war, and whether the ordinary American needs to be more worried than before, or what has worked in the past in the case of nuclear weapons?
I think we use the phrase war, the president used the phrase war, and to a certain extent that's an accurate phrase. It signifies that we're all together against a danger to our security, but it's not the right word if it is meant to be a guide to what we're supposed to do next. Pearl Harbor was the beginning of a war in a traditional sense. The United States was attacked by the forces of Imperial Japan. A country attacked another country. And it was quite clear what to do in that case, which was to wage war against the country, Japan, defeat its armed forces, not its people, defeat its armed forces, and thereby secure the peace through the defeat of a country. Today's situation doesn't meet that description at all. We were not attacked by a country, we were attacked by a splinter group of radical Islam. And there's no one against whom you can wage war in the traditional sense. Now, what's going on today, as you all see in the newspaper and see on TV in Afghanistan, is an effort to hunt down and bring to justice the particular group of Islamic extremists that perpetrated this particular act. And I'm very confident that over time we'll be successful in that. Your question, though, raises a bigger question, which is, let's suppose that in the coming months or years, Osama bin Laden, whose group we believe to be responsible for the tragedies in New York and Washington a few weeks ago, let's suppose he's apprehended and brought to justice. Does that end the problem? Well, it doesn't really end the problem, because as Louise said, terrorists have been around for a long time, and we live in a complicated, complex society. We're all dependent upon one another. We depend on the telephones and the water supply and food distribution system and all this to make our lives work. And that means that there will always be an opportunity for somebody at the fringe of society. It just so happens Osama bin Laden is at the fringe of Islam. But there are other people. The last time a building was destroyed in the United States by terrorists, you'll recall, was in Oklahoma City. You all know who did that? That wasn't a foreigner. Timothy McVeigh was an American who was an extremist personality, but are in our own country. So there are people with extremist personalities all over the world that always exist. And so there will always be a danger of somebody behaving this way. We should get into this a little bit later when the question time comes, but I'm pretty confident that if we take a few pretty simple steps to protect ourselves, we can all keep living the way we've been living pretty safely and not have to worry every day whether the building we're in is going to be destroyed by some fanatic. There's a lot we can do to make ourselves safe and keep on going on with our lives.
That's a good move. Well, to follow up on that, Dr. Richardson, to follow up on what Dr. Carter said about Osama bin Laden and the Islamic fundamentalists, in your studies of terrorism, is this a different kind of terrorism than we've seen before? I think a lot of us are wondering, I guess it gets to the question of their motives, or are their motives less political and more religious than we've seen before? And does this make it a different animal for us to respond to or to worry about or think about?
To some extent it's different, to some extent it's not. The first striking difference about this particular incident is the scale of the fallout. Close to 7,000 people were killed, as you know, in New York City. Last year, 19 Americans were killed by international terrorists all over the world. The year before that, 5. So the scale of this incident suggests it's really quite different. On the other hand, there's a lot to be, this mixture of religious and political motives, which we tend to think is much more difficult to grapple with, again, is not actually new. The various historical terrorist groups, the most zealous terrorist groups, have always had a mixture of religious and political motives. But in the last 30 years, the kind of terrorism we have seen, by and large, has not been, until recently, religiously inspired. In 1968, there were about a dozen terrorist groups, and none of them had any religious motives. Today, of the about 50 terrorist groups around the world, about 15 of them are thought to be religiously inspired. But I think one has to understand that very often religion is used as a cover for very political motives. By using a mantle of religion, leaders of these groups can try to win more supporters than they otherwise might have. In the case of bin Laden and his group Al-Qaeda, there's clearly a mixture of political and religious motives at play. And you probably read the speech he gave after the bombing of Afghanistan started. It was actually striking because while he did invoke God many times, when he actually talked about the things he objected to, they were very political things. So, for example, he objects to the fact that there are American troops deployed throughout the Middle East, particularly in Saudi Arabia. And he objects to the fact that the U.S. has supported Israel. So these are very political motives. And these are policies that we pursue because we believe them to be in our national interest, and he doesn't like them. Now, there are other factors too. He invokes his particular reading of his religion to justify his acts against us. But I think most Islamist clerics would be very clear that he uses a very arcane and almost unique interpretation of his religion, of the Quran, to justify his acts. So it's a mixed message. What we're looking at here is both a mixture of political and religious motives. That has been the case in the past. What's different about this incident, first of all, is the degree to which it was successful. And secondly, the particular individuals who carried out this act do not fit with our image of the people who are willing to sacrifice their lives. And there's been quite a few suicide terrorists in the past, in the Middle East particularly. You've seen them, I'm sure, in the news on Israel. And usually the people who commit those acts are young, they're poor, they're not well educated, and they volunteer for this act. They go through a period of intensive training, for example, like almost a boot camp training. And at the end of this training, they go out and commit this atrocity. And the particular hijackers in this instance, the 19 hijackers, don't fit that model. These were people who lived in this country for some time. Some of them were quite highly educated, and some of them had families and family connections. And And they had lots of opportunities to change their mind, and they didn't take it. So that makes the individuals involved somewhat different. They don't quite fit the profile of what we were expecting. So to some extent, it's the same, to some extent, it's different.
Thanks. To follow up with Dr. Carter, even though, as Louise has told us, the threat is somewhat old and familiar, we've taken steps as a country to do new things to respond to this. Yesterday, Tom Ridge, the former governor of Pennsylvania, was installed as our first cabinet-level head of Homeland Security, which is a phrase some of you may have heard. What are the first things that Mr. Ridge should do in his new post to make us safe, but particularly without necessarily infringing on our civil rights and freedoms that we as Americans hold so dear?
Well, there's a lot he can do, and the thing that I think is most striking to those of us who've been involved in counter-terrorism in the United States for a number of years is not only that we've been complacent and asleep, feeling that this couldn't happen to us, so we've never really taken it seriously. That's one reason why we have not, our government has not been very well prepared for this, prepared us very well for it. But there's another reason as well, which is that to defend ourselves against this kind of terrorism requires us to think in a new category. This is not really a war, as I said. For a war, you give it to the military, you say it's a military job. For 200 years, as long as our country's been around, we have had an institution, the military, part of our government, charged with waging war. You could say it's a crime, in which case it would be the FBI's job. But this is bigger than a crime. This is 7,000 people killed all at once. This is not the kind of thing you can allow to occur and then catch the person who did it and put him or her in jail. It's something you have to prevent. And most of our police and crime prevention activity is aimed at arresting people after they commit a crime and then putting them in jail. And you can't do that in this kind of situation. And it's also a disaster, so it reminds you of what happens after a hurricane or after a major fire. And we have parts of our government who deal with helping people after a disaster also. But this is not quite a disaster either, because it's not an act of God or an act of nature. It's an act of somebody deliberately doing it. So is it a war? Well, not really. Is it a crime? Well, not really. Is it a disaster? Well, not really. Well, we have war people, crime people, and disaster people in our government. We don't really have anybody who worries about terrorists. And that's the problem. Let me give you a way that you can easily understand how we have not been well prepared, or what we can do to get better prepared. I don't know how you felt. How many of you have flown? Been in an airplane? All right. So many of you have been in an airport and been on an airplane. And it's not particularly surprising to me that we didn't find, before September 11th, the people who were set out to do this. Because there are lots of people in the world, there are lots of people coming in and out of our country all the time. We don't look at everybody and look them in the eye and say, that person's a terrorist or not. So I understand that. What I don't think is acceptable, where I think our government fell down for us, is that the people who are in charge of airline security had never, it's clear now, never really thought that a plane would be taken over by somebody whose intention was to crash it into a building, to use it as a cruise missile. They thought if anybody takes over an airplane, it's because they want to take hostages and make a demand, or they want to take the airplane to Cuba or somewhere else. Now, it seems to me that there needs to be in the Federal Aviation Administration, somewhere in our government, somebody who's looking out all the time and saying, if a bad person wanted to do something horrible, what might they do? What steps can we take to make sure all those holes in our armor are filled? That was not done. Here was a hole in our armor. It was easy to get a sharp piece of metal onto an airplane. And the crew of the airplane was trained not to fight back. The crews were told if somebody takes over the plane, it's because they want to land it somewhere, not they want to smash it into a So we are authorities because they think only in the categories of war, crime, and disaster. There was nobody in our government who was thinking all the time, let me think of what a terrorist might do and what we should do to thwart a terrorist. That's the kind of effort that Tom Ridge, Governor Ridge, who's appointed by President Bush, is supposed to mount within the government. It'll be a new thing because it's a new problem and we need a new kind of response. The good news from my point of view is we've done such a lousy job of it in the past that we can get a whole lot better very easily just by paying attention to it. And that gets to the last thing, your last point about, which is, do we have to give up our civil rights in order to be effective against terrorism? I don't think so at all. I think there's so much that can be done that can protect us from these fringe extremists who want to perpetrate this kind of damage, that we can, if we get smart about it and think about it, work on it, use technology to help protect us, we can all keep going on around our business. And events like this, if they take place at all, will be very isolated and very rare.
Thanks. I think now we're going to go into audience mode. So I'm going to be Oprah. I'm going to grab a mic and come down and start taking your questions. Because I'm going to ask you questions. In the meantime, I'd ask Dr. Carter Duckers to step up to this mic. And maybe you can talk while I'm getting ready about what we can do to out-manage terrorists. How can we outsmart them?
blows up houses of Palestinians as punishment for those attacks, or shoots at demonstrators. Isn't that the same thing? Because that's violence that targets innocent people who are involved in the attacks.
Well, if the question is how states committed terrorist acts, the answer is yes, absolutely. History is full of examples. We don't talk about states as terrorists per se, just because we have lots of other words to describe state action. And so when we use the term terrorism, we tend to think of subnational groups. But this is not to say that states can't act in a manner that's immoral, illegal, or otherwise inappropriate. It's certainly the case that many states, and not just Israel, have deliberately targeted innocents. One could argue that in the Second World War, much of our bombing strategy was a deliberate effort to target innocents in order to convey a message to another party. Say the bombing of Dresden to convey a message to the German government. So it's incontrovertibly the case that states sometimes act in violation of accepted international law.
Thank you, Daniel. Next question. There's one there, over there. What's your name?
I'm Sheridan. Do you think that bombing Afghanistan is the right way to go about dealing with the Taliban and catching bin Laden?
Well, the purpose of the bombing is to put pressure on the Taliban, which is a group of people who have taken over the entire country of Afghanistan. And they have been harboring bin Laden, who we believe was responsible. The purpose of the bombing is to put pressure on the Taliban, perhaps ultimately to remove the Taliban from the position of power over the rest of Afghanistan, or pressure the Taliban into giving up bin Laden. Now, your question is, partly, I guess, is this going to work? And I think that, I certainly hope it does. I don't see any alternative to it. It's a very sad thing to be embarked upon. I cannot be as confident as I was, let us say, in the case of Kosovo, will not have the effect we want. We are going to end up having to put some soldiers into Afghanistan on the ground. I don't know how long it will take. Winter is coming in Afghanistan. The winter there is very harsh. Part of the world my son Will, Carter here, who's here, has been in with me, and he can tell you that it's a pretty harsh place to be in the middle of the winter. So it's going to take quite a bit of time, I think, before we get bin Laden. I'm confident we will, eventually. The United States will get bin Laden. And I hope that over time, we also restore in Afghanistan a government that is more popular and that cares more about its people than the Taliban does. And that we and the rest of the world help Afghanistan, which is a very poor country. Remember, most of the people in Afghanistan have nothing to do with this. They're just trying to get along with their lives every day like you are. They have nothing to do with bin Laden, and they don't particularly like the Taliban, this group that has taken over their country and turned it into a haven for terrorists. So if the Taliban, we get rid of the Taliban and we get rid of bin Laden, we still have a big problem in Afghanistan, just to help those people out. So this is something that you'll see, Ryan, I would say, in the newspapers for years and years ahead. It's a problem that's been brewing for a long time and won't go away for a long time. We've just got to keep working on it.
Thanks, Brian. You want to follow that up with anything? Okay. There's a question over here. You may have to stand up and. What's your name?
Owen Barrett. How will this change the U.S.'s policies and views of the Northern Ireland and Belfast areas, as well as the general relations with the Irish and Northern Ireland?
And this is a case dear to my heart. I think it's going to make life a little tougher for the IRA. I think it's going to put more pressure on the IRA to decommission their arms. As you probably know, the IRA thus far has refused to hand over its arms, to decommission its arms, even though it has been engaged now in a 4-year-long ceasefire. And there has been, throughout the years of the Northern Ireland conflict, there has been a certain degree of support for the IRA from this country. A great deal of their funding has come from this country. And I think this incident is going to change all that. There will no longer be support for the IRA in this country. But to be honest, that has pretty much dried up anyway. So I do think the situation in Northern Ireland is on its own trajectory. And it's a trajectory towards fashioning a peace that will last. But I think this will hasten that, because the IRA certainly don't see themselves as people like bin Laden. The IRA sees themselves as a legitimate army fighting a legitimate cause. They see themselves as like the American revolutionaries who were fighting Britain. And they don't want to be associated with the likes of bin Laden at all. So I think this may just push them a little closer to decommissioning, a little faster. I think they would have done so anyway, but this may just speed up the process a little.
Thanks, that answers your question. Another question? Okay. Good. What's your name?
I'm Tom, and I guess this is for Dr. Carter. What would our contingency plans be for a terrorist attack using nuclear or biological weapons, and what would our response be to that retaliation?
Very, very good question. Certainly a situation I hope we never face. Tom, in the first place, let me take you back from, you said, what are we going to do if it happens? Let's talk a little bit how we prevent it from happening in the first place. Okay? That's where I want to start. Let me take nuclear in the first place. Nuclear weapons, in order to make nuclear weapons, you have to either get plutonium or highly enriched uranium. Fortunately, it is a big pain in the neck to make plutonium or highly enriched uranium. And that means that most terrorists can't easily get their hands on the stuff that you make them on. If they can get the stuff, it's fairly easy to make them on. Now, where, if somebody really wanted to get some of that stuff, might they get it? One place is Russia, because Russia has, sorry to tell you, enough plutonium and highly enriched uranium to make hundreds of thousands of nuclear bombs, a lot of stuff. And we have been working with the Russians over the last 10 years since the Soviet Union broke up to make sure that all that material that's in Russia is safeguarded. minutes ago that we've only, in the last few years, really begun to take terrorism seriously in this country. And of course, now after September 11th, we're going to have to take it really seriously. We're going to have to get good at it, counterterrorism. We haven't been good at counterterrorism. The example I have in mind, Tom, is in 1996, I was in the Department of Defense, and we were thinking about the Atlanta Olympics. Every time there's a big event like the Atlanta Olympics, we are asked by the government to, the Department of Defense and the FBI and the CIA and everybody, to try to protect that event against terrorists. And we did. And for the first time, remember I told you we have cops and we have soldiers and we have emergency people and they never really got together? Well, at the Atlanta Olympics, they did. We got everybody together, the intelligence, law enforcement, national security, and we sat down and really thought through for the first time what we would do if biological terrorism occurred. Let me give you just a little example, Tom, of one little teeny way we made progress. And it sounds silly now, but it was very important at the time. The FBI has a checklist that it goes through when it's looking around an area to see if somebody might be thinking about terrorism. And on their checklist, they had look for people who are buying lots of fertilizer. For example, remember Timothy McVeigh and his instructional fertilizer, which is an explosive. They didn't have anything on their checklist dealing with biological weapons. Most FBI agents didn't know anything about biological warfare. They'd never been trained in that. They'd never studied it. So they didn't know how to look for it. We in the military, the Department of Defense, who needed to worry about biological warfare, had thought of it. And so we sat down with the FBI people and the Georgia Bureau of Investigation people. There is a GBI, Atlanta, Georgia, and we just gave them some training so that they could look around. And one of the things they looked for was crop dusting airplanes. Because a crop duster is one way to distribute germs if you're going to try to launch a biological attack. Well, did you see the newspapers the last few days? Anybody seen that the FBI has begun to, has asked everybody, if anybody who has a crop duster in the United States, to stop using it for the next few weeks? Well, why did they do that? They did that because in 1996, we trained them about biological warfare. So there's a little example of how we can get better at preventing this. Now, your big question was, what if it happens again? Maybe it will. I hope it doesn't. What if it happens again? Well, if it is a biological event, we're going to have to treat all the people who get sick. Depending upon what kind of agent it is, we can do that. If it's a nuclear event, we once again have to treat people who are exposed to radiation and try to minimize the number of people who die. And then you need to find out who did it and bring them to justice. But let's hope, knock on wood, we never see either nuclear or biological terrorism.
Thanks, Tom. Great, we've got 3 more. Let's get the young woman from Albert Guys who has a question, right? Come on in. What's your name?
I was just wondering, if we've always been aware of terrorism is going to attack us, how come we didn't take those steps that you're saying that we're taking now? How come we didn't take them before? We have to lose so many lives to bring to the forefront that we've always been, that would get affected by terrorism?
I'm sad to say that I think you're on the right track. I think it did take what happened in September 11th to make us realize that we were lazy and not paying attention to this in the way that we should. So September 11th was kind of a wake-up call for us, and I hope that we use it to make ourselves a lot better. Now, there is another reason why we didn't do it, which is the reason I go back to, which is that this is a type of problem that we've never given as an assignment to any part of our government before. So all parts of our government were doing their thing, crime, war, disaster. We never told anybody, your job is to protect us against terrorism. We have now told Governor Ridge make us safer. The United Kingdom, because of Northern Ireland, Israel, because of the Palestinians, many other countries are better than this than we are. We have lived a lucky life in the United States. Most other countries have had terrorism on their soil. We have mostly not. So we've been lucky, but that's made us complacent as well. Now we're going to have to be like the British, like the Israelis, and like others, more vigilant and work hard at this. If we work hard at it, we can do it.
Thanks for your question. We have time for one more question. I know you guys are staying warmed up, but here's one down here. Again, in the sixth row, sixth row. Okay, it's overrun. I'll strangle it one way. What's your name?
Ryan Pickering. And I heard on the news last night that the government was expecting a retaliation from the Taliban due to the bombs. My question is, do you think there will be a strike, and if so, where or when?
There are going to be attempts to retaliate. They can come in two different ways. One is that bin Laden himself and his groups probably planned. I've been watching these guys for 5.5 years. And they, the way they operate is they have a number of different schemes at any one time in various stages of planning. So it's almost surely the case that bin Laden's organization has other schemes there at bottom. Now, we break them up whenever we discover them. One of the secrets that hasn't really been told enough is that over the last few years, we have broken up many plots by bin Laden. We didn't catch him before September 11th, but we caught him in a number of instances in the past. He's been about to do something that we got before we got his people, before they could do it. So you can bet that bin Laden's group has other schemes that they're hatching or have hatched. And I can only hope that our law enforcement people catch and stop those events before they occur. But we might not, in which case there could be another event by bin Laden. But the second category, which you'll surely see, is sadly when something like this happens, a lot of people, fanatical people, even crazy people come out of the woodwork. And so you'll see little acts of violence done by people who are, they call copycats. And some of these will be Americans who are just a little crazy, who will do something. And then, of course, there will be many people in the Islamic world who feel that what we're doing in Afghanistan is a bad thing. And they will, some of them, will also try to carry terrorist acts. Now, these probably won't be these are not dramatic as flying airplanes and buildings. They'll be smaller things. But sadly, there will be a few people around the world who are going against. And you may see events, you'll probably see some attempts, but many of them, I hope, will be broken up by law enforcement intelligence before they occur.
I'd just like to add one point on that. While I entirely agree with everything Ash has said, I think it's very important to bear in mind to keep this issue in perspective. The fact that there may indeed be attempts does not mean that we should live fearfully. It does not mean that we should change the way we live. The chances are you are at infinitely greater risk every time you step into a car than you are from terrorists. The statistics are such that you are more likely to be killed by lightning than by a terrorist. So bear that in mind. And don't live fearfully of these people. Don't concede to them by letting them frighten them in that way.
It's a great note to end on, so watch out for lightning, everyone. Thank you all, you were terrific. And let's thank Dr. Carter, Dr.
Not only do I think it's appropriate to thank the three presenters, but I think it's also appropriate to thank you for your attention and we turn now to B block. Thank you. Attention, please. Thank you. We're privileged today to have with us some nationally renowned people in the field of terrorism. I think that in this day and age, over the course of the last month, even if terrorism was not something on the minds of most Americans, it is today. I would like to at this time introduce Dr. Beth Ladow. In addition to being a member of the Winchester School Committee, she is also a professor of history, and she will MC the program this morning. Thank you.
Welcome, everyone. We're warmed up. We've done this once, and you're the second group, so we're expecting big things from you. American novelist Willa Cather wrote shortly after World War I that the world broke in two, expressing the feeling of many people at that time that life before was somehow very different than life after. And since the events of September 11th, most of us have had that same feeling. That life is different and that we need people who can help us understand how and why. It's my great pleasure to introduce to you this morning two such people who have written, lectured, and taught extensively as experts in subjects that, as Mr. Olson said, over the past few weeks have been on every American's mind. Terrorism, how the United States is responding to it, and how it affects our lives. Both our guests live in Winchester, and they have received a long list of prizes and honors because they are very good at understanding and explaining the international political landscape that we live in. Today they are here mainly to answer your questions and help us all understand that landscape better. Dr. Louise Richardson, until recently an associate professor of government at Harvard University, is now executive dean of the Radcliffe Institute for Advanced Study. She is an expert in international terrorism and international relations theory, author of a book called When Allies Differ, and has won Harvard's highest teaching awards for her excellence and sensitivity in teaching these subjects to her students. Dr. Ashton Carter is former Assistant Secretary of Defense for International Security Policy. He was in the Clinton administration, and is now Ford Foundation Professor of Science and International Affairs at Harvard's Kennedy School of Government. He's co-author of a book called Preventive Defense, a new security strategy for America, and was responsible for national security policy toward the former Soviet Union, including their nuclear weapons and other weapons of mass destruction, and for oversight of the U.S. nuclear arsenal and missile defense programs. So he is one of the guys who keeps us all safe. This is our format. I will ask Drs. Carter and Richardson a few questions just to get things warmed up, and then open the floor to questions from you. We hope the students and then the staff will feel free to ask also. I'll grab the mic and run down like Oprah and you can speak right into the microphone. So to start off, I'd like to ask Dr. Richardson, what is terrorism? Can you give us a little of its history so we know maybe how it began and how it's changed over time?
Good morning. Delighted to be here. As to what is terrorism, it may sound a bit boring to start off trying to define a term, but actually the definition of terrorism is crucially important. I don't know if any of you have been following the debates in the UN General Assembly over the past few days, but they've actually been hamstrung because of the inability to agree on a shared definition of terrorism. So there are three ways of defining terrorism. One is by the political context in which the act takes place. The idea being that if you have a democracy in which people have a peaceful means of expressing their opposition, and people don't use that and use terrorism instead, an act becomes a terrorist act, even though the same act might not be in an authoritarian state where people didn't have peaceful means of expressing their views. Another way of is that you define terrorism by the goal that's being sought. Yasser Arafat, for example, told the United Nations, no group can be a terrorist group if they're pursuing a noble cause. Again, I think this is not quite the right way to do it, because you end up just depending on your view on the goal being sought, deciding whether something is terrorist or not. And the third definition, and the one that I like to use, depends upon the means that are employed by a group. And this is what determines whether a group is a terrorist group or not. So a terrorist act is a violent act. It's a political act. It's motivated by politics, not by personal gain. The point of the act is to communicate a political message. So it's not simply to kill people, or it's not even in the expectation of defeating the enemy, but rather in an effort to communicate a political message. And terrorism, in terrorist cases, to the target, the victims of the terrorist act, are not the audience that is being addressed. So they don't really care whether they kill this group or that group. The point is to use the killing of these people to convey a political message to another party, usually the government. And the final characteristic of terrorism, and the one that really sets it apart from other forms of political violence, is the deliberate targeting of innocent people. The point is to select people randomly, because if nobody is selected, then nobody is safe. So the idea is to spread terror as much as possible, and by making your act as random as possible. Now, terrorism has for a very long time been used as a weapon of the weak against the strong. It's used by people who know they cannot defeat their enemy on the battlefield, so they use other means. And the first known group of terrorists dated from the 1st century after Christ. They were known as the Sicarii, or Zealots. That's where we get the term zealots today. And they killed Romans and their collaborators. There's another famous group from which the word assassin comes, known as the assassins, who operated from the 11th to the 13th century. So there have been various groups throughout history. In the 18th century, several groups used suicide tactics, suicide bombings, in order to defeat colonial empires, which were much stronger than them. In the 19th century, we had a wave of terrorism, primarily associated with Russian and Irish nationalism, or the Russian anarchists. But the terrorism that we come to know today really dates from the late 1960s, and has been started in the Middle East primarily, but it is in no sense restricted to the Middle East. There are various different types of terrorist groups. There are religious terrorist groups. There are, and these can be either groups like Al-Qaeda or groups like a sect, like the Japanese Action Club. Then there are also groups like ethno-nationalist groups like the IRA or the ETA in Spain. And these are groups which are trying to fulfill traditional objectives, gaining control over territory. There are Maoist groups inspired by the philosophy of Mao, say in Peru or in the Philippines. So there are various different types of terrorist groups, but all of them share the tactic of trying to target civilians in an effort to convey a political message to another person.
Thank you, Dr. Richardson. So to follow on that, we've heard now what terrorism is. Now we'd like to know a little bit about what we're doing about it. I think we know that since September 11th, America's kind of awakened to this in a way that we haven't before. And yesterday, Tom Ridge, who's the former governor of Pennsylvania, became our first cabinet-level head of something called Homeland Security. So, Dr. Carter, if you could tell us a little bit about how this fits in our national government, and what might be the first things Mr. Ridge will do in this new post, and how it will make Americans safer, and finally, how to balance those safeties with American civil liberties that we hold so dear.
Well, what Governor Ridge is supposed to do is be the first, for the first time, someone charged in our federal government with preventing acts like the ones that were perpetrated in New York and Washington on September 11th. And if such events do occur, which we hope they don't in the future, minimizing the loss of life. And I say that's a new thing in our government, and that may shock you. And you may say to yourself, well, what has the federal government been doing if it hasn't been worried about the terrorism of this sort? Let me tell you a little story that will give you some idea of why we have not so far been very good at counterterrorism in our country. Of course, the first reason is we haven't had, thank goodness, much terrorism on our soil. The British are used to it because of Northern Ireland. The Israelis are used to it because of the Palestinian situation. But we in the United States have never had war-like violence on our territory for a very long time. World War I was over there. World War II was over there. The Gulf War was over there. Vietnam War was over there. All the wars in which we have been involved have been somewhere else. And so we haven't had an experience of violence on our own territory. And consequently, our government has never really taken it seriously. I remember when I was in the Pentagon, I began to get concerned about 1995, 1996 about this kind of terrorism. And however, the basic view of the Department of Defense, not of me personally, but the basic corporate view of the Department of Defense is we do wars, we don't do terrorism. And if you went over to the Department of Justice and you said, well, how about the FBI? Are you in charge of this? They would say, no, we do crime. So we'll wait until a crime occurs, and then we'll go arrest the people who did the crime. He said, we can't allow this kind of crime to occur. You did. Well, sorry, we don't do that. Not here, we don't do windows. And then we go to the emergency management people. These are the people who react if there's a hurricane or a tornado. And they said, sorry, we only take care of acts of nature, not deliberate acts by other people. And what I'm saying is that there was no one really in our system of government who regarded it as his or her job to deal with this problem. There's good news and bad news. The bad news, of course, is that we didn't catch the people who did this thing on September 11th before they did it. We've caught many, many terrorists, and including Bin Laden's group, before they committed acts like this. A lot of that is kept secret, but it goes on all the time. But we didn't catch them before September 11th, and that's a failing of our government in that instance. Moreover, we didn't only not catch the people, we hadn't really thought about the trick they used to take over those airplanes. They didn't use a gun or a bomb, they used a simple little knife, and they managed to take over a whole airplane with a knife. Nobody really thought about that possibility. So the bad news is we haven't been good at it so far. The good news is, and this is really the main thing, I believe, I would say you all, is that if Governor Ridge is successful, which I believe he will be, pulling the government together, so the law enforcement people, intelligence people, military people, disaster relief people, all work together on this problem. There's no reason why we can't win this so-called war. It's not really a war on terrorism. And we can't make it so that these events are very, very rare, mostly get detected before they occur, very minimum loss of life. And this will not be something that you'll have to wake up every morning worrying is going to happen to you, or it's going to happen in Winchester. We can lead very normal lives. The last thing Dr. Dow asked is, do we have to give up our rights in order to be protected against terrorists? And there's a lot of talk about that in the newspaper. And there is so much that we can do to protect ourselves. It has nothing to do with our rights. It's just good, sensible, determined effort. That I don't think that, I think anybody who tells you you have to surrender your rights in order to prevail against terrorism has not thought about the problem very carefully. I'll give you one teeny little example that sticks in my mind right now because my son, Will Carter, is here from the 8th grade. Will, you go into the Pentagon with me many times when I was in the Pentagon. I remember taking his Cub Scout troop to the National Military Command Center, to the heart of the Pentagon, where the war plans are made and where operations are conducted from. And he and all of his buddies were in there. Well, I don't think in the future we're going to let the Cub Scouts in the National Military Command Center. Now, is that taking away their rights? I don't think so. I just think they don't have a right to be in the National Military Command Center. I just think we're going to have to be a little bit more careful than we have been, because now we've tasted that this kind of thing can happen, even in the United States. Rare, but it can.
Thank you, Dr. Carter. Are you warmed up? Are your questions ready? I'm going to get the mic and ask Doctors Richardson and Carter to come up to the mic here, and I'll go down on the floor, and you can start asking questions. Thank you. All right. I'm going to open that question already. Thank you. Get it all the way over. Okay, what's your name?
What are we doing racial profiling and reports and other things related to that?
Good question.
The question was, what do we do about racial profiling, airports, and that sort of thing? And the implication of that question is, are people of Middle Eastern origin, for example, going to find themselves discriminated against because this particular instance of terrorism happens to originate in the Middle East? And I would like to say, no, I hope that people of Middle Eastern origin are not discriminated against. I do not believe that they were discriminated against by our authorities. I think the FBI and some of those police authorities have been instructed to find other ways of being effective at looking for people who might do this kind of thing that don't involve just looking at their face or kind of name that may be significant for the name that they have. So I don't worry about that so much as far as our authorities are concerned. What I do worry about it, Josh, as far as some of our citizens are concerned, discriminating against other citizens. You may recall that just about 2 weeks ago, a Sikh, which is an Indian person from India, or Indian heritage, that is not Muslim, that happens to wear a turban, a Sikh man, an American citizen, was beaten up and I guess killed in Texas by somebody who was filled with hatred by things that happened and just didn't know the difference between somebody from India and somebody from the Middle East. So we are going to see these kinds of things go on. And I think that one of the things we have to be very careful on is as we get down at counterterrorism, which I think we can do, that we not go to excess. This is something that we should take care of, just like we take care of lots of other security problems, in a way that's completely consistent with our being a civilized country. Now, I guess I'll say one more aspect, which is, let's recall that all this terrorism does not originate with foreigners, with the Middle East, or people of the Islamic faith. The last person to blow up a building in the United States, remember, was Timothy McVeigh. It was in Maryland. So this kind of fanaticism that leads people to do this kind of destructive act, it can happen anywhere, in any kind of population. There are people who are deviant or desperate or a little crazy to do this kind of thing. We all need to remember that and not start discriminating.
Thank you, Josh. You have another follow-up. Okay, next question.
Jason. I was just going to ask, if we can see the government going after the terrorist group that is thought to be implicated in the events of September 11th. How do you foresee our government going after other terrorist groups globally, like the IRA or the ETA in Spain?
Well, I think both the IRA and the ETA are not problems for our government. They are problems for the British and Spanish governments. And I think what this means is that our government will be more sympathetic to the British and Spanish governments as they try and deal with those particular groups. For those groups, America is not the enemy. They are making things within their own state. In the case of the IRA, they want the state of Northern Ireland to be abolished. They want to unite with the rest of Ireland. In the case of the BAS, the ETA, they want to independent government. So they have no argument with the American government, and indeed, as you probably know, historically American citizens have actually helped fund the IRA. Has historically been significant counterterrorism is going to be more of a priority for our government. It means that there is going to be more shared intelligence. And the IRA and the ETA have very close links with one another, but they also have some links with some Latin American groups. As you may know, 3 IRA men were caught recently in Colombia where they were training farm gorillas. So I think the fact that terrorism is becoming a much higher priority for our government means that we're going to share intelligence with other allies in particular, which will help them track down their terrorists. But there are different types of terrorist groups which have different objectives. So while we personally have nothing to fear from the ethno-nationalist groups like the IRA and the ETA, and our allies too, and I think this will make us more sympathetic to them, more helpful to them. But ultimately, that's really, they're different domestic terrorist groups, as opposed to Al-Qaeda, which is the group we believe to be responsible for this. And they target not just the US, but the West. In fact, the British government, or the British people, lost more individuals in the World Trade Center bombing than they have in any single act by the IRA or any other terrorist group in their history. So the transnational terrorists are the enemy of all of us. Our government has made it very clear, and I think some of our allies have made it very clear that they share that view too.
Thank you. Another question? Here we go. You just have it first in the room. Come on over, say your name.
Hi, Manny. So just kind of two-part question. What is the reason for the United States not having security measures in place, such as those used in Israel at airports, and why weren't they in place before, and why does it seem like they're not getting in place right now?
Sandy.
That's an excellent question. Let me sharpen it a little bit more, because I think I agree with where you're headed here. I was not surprised that we didn't discover before September 11th the 12 or 14 individuals who were planning this attack. I say I wasn't surprised because it's a big world, there are lots of people crossing borders all the time, and it's difficult to find such a small number of people and to think about what they might be scheming to do. So that doesn't surprise me, and I don't fault our authorities for not having found people, although I should tell you that our luck in doing that is pretty good. We have broken up lots of plots by the Laden attacks, but we didn't this time. That doesn't bother me. But where I think you're saying to yourself, well, why didn't anybody think that somebody might take over a plane and use it as a guided bomb? How come nobody thought of it? Obviously, Bin Laden thought of it. How come the Federal Aviation Administration, the FBI, the Department of Defense hadn't thought of it? And that gets back to what I was saying earlier, is we haven't had anybody in our government whose job it was to deal with this problem, because we've never really had it here before. Now, I know the effort that Governor Ridge is putting together will lead to there being people whose job, when we say, it's your job to outthink the terrorists. Think of all the ways some awful person could do an awful thing, and then make sure that we make that impossible. In the particular case that you have in mind, in the El Al, the airline of Israel, which is serious about terrorism because they've had terrorism on their territory for a long time. They've got their act together. And on El Al, have any of you ever been on an El Al airplane? Do you remember that the cockpit is sealed off from the rest of the plane on El Al? There's an armored door, and so the passengers can't get at the flight crew. Whereas most of you have been on an American airliner where the doors open, you can see the Thailand, and they're taking kids in, they're taking pictures, and that's a wonderful thing. But in Israeli airlines, they don't allow that. And that shouldn't be allowed on our airlines either. And now we know. But I think that somebody ought to have thought of that before September 11th. And they didn't. The basic reason goes back to the thing that may surprise you. But there's nobody in the U.S. government who will stand up and say, it's my job to deal with terrorism. People will stand up and say, it's my job to deal with Saddam Hussein and to fight war. People will stand up and say, it's my job to solve crimes when they're committed. Other people will stand up and say, it's my job when Hurricane Mitch hits to deal with it. But now we need somebody whose job is this, and that's what we have with Governor Rich.
Thanks. I guess we have the same question up here. You guys are mind readers, so we'll have to have another question. One over here. Stop. Thanks. One of you may want to pass this down. Please say.
Hi, I'm Craig. I was just wondering, do you think that these passengers are expendable if people are the cockpit sealed off? Because if terrorists are in the back and they can't get to the pilots, they can still kill everybody in the back and not get to the front. I mean, it's good in concept, but it's still, you know, result.
The question.
The purpose of, it is a good question, the purpose of sealing off the cockpit is to make sure that the plane can't be taken over and be used to kill more people than are on the plane. There were several hundred people on the airplanes that hit the World Trade Center. There were several thousand who were killed. So you're trying to save the thousands. Now, does that mean you're sacrificing the hundreds? The people in the plane? Well, if you've succeeded, as we have for many years, in keeping people with guns off a plane, then you're talking about a small number of people with knives. And it's an open question whether the passengers in the back of the plane will overwhelm the people with the knives. But at any rate, the airline will be used as a guided so it doesn't make it, everything completely safe any more than you can stop some nut like a Burger King from pulling a knife. But at least it stops the airplane from being used. That would be the purpose.
Okay, another question? Oh, there's one back here. State your name, please.
Afghanistan, how many of you
it's very sad because Afghanistan has been a place of wars going back and forth, lots of factions fighting each other for a long time. And at some point, we have to, we can only hope the Afghan people will put together a government which cares about the people, feeds the people, educates the people, and so forth, in the way that the Taliban has not. But that is not our objective. Our objective is to catch good lives. And I believe that we will succeed in doing that. I think it will take some time. Winter is coming in Afghanistan. It's going to be very difficult to mount effective ground operations there to pursue good life. So it may be, this may go on for many, many months and into next spring and next summer. But our objective is a fairly narrow one, I think. We're not going to bring peace to Afghanistan.
Thank you. We get another question. One right back. Everybody quiet down. So we get a question. What's your name?
Hello. Do you think that anyone will ever catch Ben Laden?
I think the Press Department just gave its opinion on that, and I share it, which is that I think it's very comfortable. We will, in fact, and catch bin Laden. I don't think that would be the end of our troubles with terrorism, but, and I do think it may take us some time, but I'm fully confident we will catch him.
Thank you. Next question. Good. We don't want all the guys to ask the questions, right? Let's see if my cord will come here without breaking. Stand up. I think I'm at the end of my rope.
I'm sure we have a logical question. What's the likeliness of Boston getting bombed?
Right, the question is, what is the likelihood of Boston being bombed? I would say the likelihood is very, very low. And I think what bin Laden and terrorists like him want is for us to sit around at home worrying about whether we're going to be bombed. And I don't think we should do that, not ever. I think that's when we let them, that's when we can see the victory, if we let them terrorize us. The fact is, Boston is unlikely to be targeted by any standards. It's not impossible, but it's highly, highly unlikely. So unlikely that we should never do anything to change the way we live out of fear of it. While almost 7,000 people were killed in New York and the Pentagon, last year only 19 Americans were killed by international terrorism all over the world. The year before that, only 5 Americans were killed all over the world. So if you take the long-term perspective, we are very safe. We were safe before September 11th. We're still safe today. We put our lives at far greater risk by every time we step into a car. And statistically, we're more likely to be killed by lightning than we are by a terrorist. So don't worry about it. So my advice would be, don't worry about Boston being targeted.
Thank you, Dr. Richardson. I've been told we've run out of time. That's a nice note to end on. So you can all